Go ahead and stand up as we sing Humble Yourself. Also at this time, we'll dismiss our young ones downstairs at Children's Church. If you're visiting with us, if your children would like to partake in that, that's a stairs on each side of the foyer. Please do that as we sing. Humble yourself in the sight of the Lord. Humble yourself in the sight of the Lord. Humble yourself in the sight of the Lord.
Once again, good morning. Glad that you are here. Invite you to come back at, is it 2 o'clock? 2 o'clock. The Chosen. I think we're in season 4. And it's always just incredibly interesting to me. So I invite you to come and watch it with us right here at 2 o'clock. I think perhaps the greatest measure of our maturity is how we handle authority. I think that's one of the greatest measures of maturity. How do you handle authority? How do you handle power? In other words, how do you respond when it dawns on you that you at this moment are the most important person in the room? Not based on your own decision, of course, but you just realize you're the one with the most responsibility, the most power, the most influence in the room at this moment. How do you handle that? Whether you're at work, at home, wherever, but at any moment, at any time when it dawns on you, all eyes are on me. How do you handle that? What do you do? I'm the one in charge. I'm the most powerful person in the room. What do you do in that moment? It says so much about what we do in that moment. The greatest reflection of our individual maturity is what you do with your influence, with your authority, with your power. If it's been given to you, what do you do with it? And few things are more disturbing, I think you'll agree, few things are more disturbing than when you see somebody with power or influence and they leverage it for their own benefit, to the neglect of the people they're responsible for. To the neglect of the people that have chosen to follow them, they did them wrong. Isn't that sad? Isn't it awful? But at the same time, there are a few things more inspiring than a leader who has some sort of influence, some sort of authority, who can say no to themselves to benefit those that have chosen to follow. When you give up self to lead. Some of our favorite stories are the men or women of influence or power, whether it's a politician or someone we worked for. Maybe it was our parents, and they said no to themselves so that they could say yes to others. People that have chosen to follow. That's what I mean by how do you handle authority, power, influence, whatever. Israel already had a king. So if you're going to anoint the next one when there's already a king, you better keep it secret. Right? Because this current king is going to do away with the one to follow. So Samuel shows up. He doesn't even tell Jesse why he's there. He says, Jesse, I've come here to do a special sacrifice. I need you to invite all your family to this special sacrifice. And the idea is this. Samuel thought, as soon as I see the son of Jesse that's going to be the next king, I'll get the nod from God. It'll be apparent. I'm just going to know who this guy is. So Samuel is scanning the crowd, trying to figure out which one is the next king. The text says, when they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab, which was Jesse's oldest son, which was his firstborn. You kind of go with the firstborn in a situation like this, right? The oldest. That's the natural pick. He thought, surely the Lord's anointed stands here before the Lord. And this is easy. From firstborn, first kid, we don't even have to do the sacrifice. This is just easy. But you may have remembered the story from childhood. The Lord said to Samuel, do not consider his appearance. That's a very difficult thing to do. When you meet somebody, the first thing you notice is what? You didn't notice their IQ? No, of course not. You didn't notice their manners? Probably not. The first thing you notice is the way they look. And all of us, even in ancient times, ascribe value to someone based on what they look like. God says, Samuel, do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have what? Rejected him. Why? Because the Lord teaches us something here, the outward appearance. Even though that's what we notice and we look at it, that's not what God looks at. People look at the outward appearance, the Lord looks at the heart. In other words, it's what's in a man that makes a man. So ladies, don't be fooled by that outward appearance. It's what's in a man that makes the man. It's what's in a woman that makes the woman. So men, oh, never mind, you're hopeless. Anyway, the story goes on. 6 sons later. And catch this, 6 sons later, there is still no king. And then this strange thing happens where Samuel walks over to middle school David, who finally is brought in from the fields, pours oil over his head, gives him a blessing, and then Samuel packs up his stuff and leaves. And the whole family's standing there like, what just happened? There's no indication that Samuel told them what just happened. But here's what we know. Since he was a boy, since he was a middle schooler, David knew that there was something. Samuel, a prophet of God, came and anointed him for something. Does he know he's going to be the next king? And about 18 months from that moment, maybe a couple of years, he will kill Goliath. And he just blossoms with fame, and I don't know if it's fortune, but definitely fame. He is married off to one of King Saul's daughters. He becomes best friends with the king's oldest son, who's going to be the next king, right? Your oldest son becomes the next king. Jonathan 7 years, things are great. And then, as we saw in a previous sermon, Saul gets threatened. He gets jealous. He tries to kill David, and David becomes a fugitive for about the next 8 years. He gets jealous, tries to kill him. David is on the run. So for the next 8 years, on the run, hiding with his band of men, trying not to side with the Philistines, but at the same time trying to stay away from King Saul. He's in no man's land. And everyone who supports King Saul, well, they don't like David. But they know God has chosen him for something special. And all the while, if you read through this incredibly detailed narrative, you learn some extraordinarily important lessons. And maybe the most important lesson is that David will learn in the wilderness years, it's not about me. That's the most important lesson he will learn. It's not about me. It's about God. It's about God's way, doing God things in God's own time, God's will and God's way. And the interesting thing is, the narrative is so fascinating. On 2 different occasions, you know one of them probably if you grew up in church, but on 2 different occasions, David has an opportunity to kill King Saul. One of them is famous. David is hiding in a cave. King Saul's men are passing by. David is going to wait on King Saul to pass by. He's going to wait till they go in the other direction. He'll come out of the cave with his men. They'll go, oh, you know the story. Right in front of the king. They pass right by him. I mean, right by him. And King Saul has to go to the bathroom. And it's dark in there, and he doesn't know that David is standing right there. He's in the most vulnerable position possible, and all of David's men turn to him, and it has to be with some kind of ultrasonic whispering. Are you kidding me? David, here's your chance. Here's your chance. The text says, then the men with him said, this is the day the Lord spoke of when he said to you, because David had told them all he knew. And David says, guys, hang with me, stick with me. Things are tight now. Things are going to get better, but God has something special for me planned. And they say, this is it, David. This is the day. God has handed King Saul right into your hands. God said, I will give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish. David almost falls for it, but you remember the story. He creeps up on King Saul. He's about to kill him, and then he walks out. He could walk out of the cave victorious. Everyone in Saul's army would have immediately recognized him as the king. But he says, no. I've already done this same thing once. I've already killed somebody that I regret. It's not going to happen again. I've learned this lesson the hard way. Saul finishes his business, leaves the cave. They're about to leave the area. David comes to the mouth of the cave. And everybody in Saul's army knows he could have taken the king's life if he had chosen to. David, though, is a bit mischievous. He walks out of the mouth of the cave and says, yoo-hoo. I don't think that's what he said, but basically he got everybody's attention. Hey, Saul! Saul! And everybody looks, and there's David. May the Lord judge between you and me. I'm not going to be the judge. May the Lord avenge the wrongs you've done to me. My hand will never touch you. Although everybody in front of me knows I have every right to take your life to defend my own. You're out here trying to kill me. I could have killed you. I'm not going to do it. Then there's another story. It's not quite as popular. It's a few months later. Saul and his army are in the desert of Ziph. A wide open plain, rolling hills, nowhere to hide, virtually no trees. David had sent spies out to track Saul's progress. He always wants to know where Saul is so he can go the other way. A report comes back to him. He's completely surrounded by 3,000 men. Here's what happens. David and Abishai went down into Saul's army at night, and there was Saul laying asleep inside the camp with his spear stuck in the ground near his head. That's what they did. That was the practice. Abner, who is the chief of the king's bodyguard, is the one responsible for protecting Saul. Abner and the soldiers lying around him. Abishai says to David, and I'm pretty sure he whispered since they're in the middle of 3,000 men, God has delivered your enemy into your hands. In other words, David, okay, I know you're all freaked out about the fact that he's the king. So you should read the Bible. This stuff is fascinating. I'm skipping some of the parts, okay, but you should read this. But David said to Abishai, I'm pretty sure in a whisper, don't destroy him. Who can lay a hand on the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? I refuse to violate the will of God in order to gain the blessing of God. I'm not going to violate God to get what I deserve. It's not about me. And he says to Abishai, take Saul's spear. I'll take his water jug. They creep back out of the camp, go up on a hillside and wait for the sun to come up. And as the sun is coming up, they're a silhouette. David just can't resist the temptation, and he yells out, Abner! That's the chief of King Saul's bodyguard. Everybody recognizes David's voice, and they look up on the hillside, and there is the spear and the water jug in their hands. They know. We could have done it again. We could have killed him again. We were right there while you were sleeping. But they didn't. Eventually, and I'm skipping a lot, eventually King Saul and his son Jonathan are killed by the Philistines in battle. The two men that stood in the way of David becoming king. And the interesting thing is, the text tells us David actually mourned their deaths. The two men that stood in the way of him becoming king, when they died, instead of throwing a party, he mourns for their death. The tribe of Judah, of which David comes from, says, you are now the king. The other 11 do not. King Saul's son Ishbosheth, they recognize as their king. So David is now king over one tribe. And for 7 years, there's a conflict between David and the house of King Saul. Eventually, throughout all of this, David tries to stay out of the way. People keep telling him, claim what's yours. It's your right. You can do it. David says, no. God's way, God's time. I'm not going to do this. 7 years it goes on. Finally, two brothers sneak into Ishbosheth's house while he's taking a nap, and they murder him in his sleep. And they think they've done a great thing for David. They cut off Ishbosheth's head, and they bring it to David, ready to receive a reward. The last obstacle has been removed. Here's what the text says. They brought the head of Ishbosheth to David at Hebron, and they said to the king, here is the head of Ishbosheth, son of Saul, your enemy who tried to kill you. A little bit of information here about beheadings. This is interesting. You can use this somewhere. The Old Testament full of beheadings. In fact, ancient times, there's a lot of beheadings, right? That's because they didn't have iPhones. They didn't have ways of communicating to prove it. You couldn't take a picture, so you put the head in a bag and you brought it to the person as proof. This person is dead. Yep, I can see that. They bring the head to David. They think they've done a great thing. They throw the head in a bag, present it to David, expecting to get a reward. David answers Rechab, that's one of the names, and his brother Baanah. As surely as the Lord lives, who has delivered me out of every trouble. As surely as the Lord lives, who has delivered me out of every trouble. David is thinking, the Lord didn't need your help. He can do it on his own. When someone told me that Saul is dead and thought they were bringing me good news, I seized them and put them to death. I skipped that part of the story earlier, but that's what David said. How much more when wicked men have killed an innocent man in his own house and in his own bed, should I not now demand this blood from your hand and rid the earth of you? In David's mind, he doesn't think, let's get rid of this opposing king. Let God do it in his way, on his time. We don't have to help him out. How much more when wicked men have killed an innocent man in his own bed, in his own house? David gave an order and his men killed both of the brothers. They buried his head in Abner's tomb at Hebron as an act of honor. Well, after his death, the other 11 tribes do finally declare David as their king, and finally, he becomes king of the entire nation after being a fugitive for 8 years, after being at war for 7 more years with Saul's house. This is what the text says. All the tribes, not just Judah, all the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and said, "We are your own flesh and blood." They go on to say, in the past, while Saul was king over us, you were the one who led Israel on the military campaigns. In other words, we recognize you have fought hard for us. You have been on our side. We recognize you as king. David had all the influence. He had the power. He had the authority. He had all of the influence. He makes a covenant with them. Now, a covenant, if you don't know the word, is like a contract in our day. 2 parties are going to make an agreement. In the context, one says, I'll do this. The other says, I'll do this. They're both held to this by a binding contract. They both have to hold up their end of the bargain. It's an arrangement, an agreement. And King David makes a promise to the people. It's completely unnecessary. He doesn't have to do it. His word is law. Whatever he says is what happens. But he agrees to make a contract with them, a covenant. He's facing a group of elders who did not support him when he was on the run. He could have exacted vengeance on every single one of them, except for the ones from Judah. They did support him. But he makes covenant with them. Why? Well, the last 3 words of the text explains it all. And at this point of the story, when all the elders of Israel had come to King David at Hebron, he made a covenant with them in Hebron before the Lord. He recognizes, I am king, but I am not the king. I am under someone else's authority. That's what makes David different. We said in the first part of this series, with all of David's ups and downs, David never confused himself with the King of Israel, God. He always recognized there is God and he is in control. And David was 30 years old and he reigned over Israel for 40 years. Now, we're going to pick up that part of the story next week, but here's the point. David waited. He waited for 15 years. That's not easy. This is amazing. He waits 15 years for God to give him what he's promised. And during that time, he learns some extraordinary lessons. He learns that leadership is a stewardship. He learns that he has to do this well, and the responsibility falls on him. And he learns that kings are accountable. This is inspiring. If you think you're a leader or a boss, certainly you read this story, and again, I've skipped a lot of details. When you read it, it inspires you to do it well. Not sure if I put the next text. I did. John chapter 13 and verse 1. It was just read for us a few moments ago. It's just before Passover. And the Passover festival, of course, when they celebrate their escape from Egyptian slavery, big celebration. John, who was there, tells us this story. Now, I'm going to skip a lot because time is fleeting. So if you're getting notes, you might miss a few. See me afterwards and I'll get them to you. It says, Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. He knows. Some way, somehow, he knows. Now watch this. Down in verse 3. Jesus knew that the Father had put what? Say it again. All things under his. He is the one with power, the most power in the room. He is the one with the most influence, the most authority in the room. Do you know what he does? What do you do? When you are recognizing it's me, all eyes are on me. You know what Jesus does? He got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. What do you do when you recognize you are the most important person in the room? You wash feet. You serve. You show your love. You show your power. You show your influence that way. It was an incredible teaching moment. And he would go on to say, now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I've set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Maybe you're at home, you're the big sister, the big brother. This still applies to you. Maybe you're at work, and whether you're a custodian or a board member, you have some authority. What do you do? It's the measure of your maturity. What do you do? Do you do it in selfishness to the neglect of your people? Or do you, like Jesus and like David, wait and do it right? Do you remember this verse? Oh, I didn't put it on there. The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to what? Serve. And give his life as a ransom for many. Would you bow with me as we pray? Father, I thank you for David, for Jesus, who modeled what this authority looks like, what this power, this responsibility looks like. Help us, Father, to be as humble as they. Help us, Father, to be inspired, to be better at handling responsibility. Help us to say no to self and yes to whomever is following. Thank you, Father. In his name we pray. Amen. As we sing this next song, is it No Tears in Heaven? No Tears in Heaven. I can't wait. Can you? I was able to go by and visit my dad, his gravesite, this week. I didn't stay long. It looks just the same as last time I saw it. But I thought, I can't wait. No tears in heaven. If we can assist you on your journey, whether you're not yet a Christian and want to become one, or whether you are a Christian but have gotten sidetracked, distracted in some way, let us help hold you accountable, pray for you. If it's private, see one of our shepherds in the office over here. If it's public, come to the front. Do so right now as we stand and as we sing.